Folks, woke capital is becoming a dictatorship. So argues my guest on today's edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, Stephen R. Soukup, in his brand new book, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. Today, we're going to dive into how corporations became woke and what's really going on here, and a little bit about what we can do about it, even on a personal investing level. We'll talk with Stephen Soukup today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, once again coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and we're getting started right now.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, grateful for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Once again, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, and it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you on, I don't know if we're the only show where we do our own theme song, but we have a lot of fun with it, to be sure. That's the great Biff Gore. Now, I don't give him enough credit recently, but Biff Gore was on season 6 of The Voice, got pretty darn far. And we had a lot of fun, a great time putting together, writing, and recording the official theme song for Jimmy at the Crossroads. So great to be with you today, once again, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Please, if you have not done so already, subscribe to the YouTube channel and also to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. And also, if you like this video, please click like and also share it so others can see this very important conversation that we're going to have today. And of course, don't forget to follow our friends at the Washington Examiner at WashingtonExaminer.com. Folks, we are at a precarious time in many respects in this country right now when it comes to free speech, when it comes to just a cultural moment that seems to be trending in the wrong direction. And a lot of this has to do with how corporations have gone woke. Specifically, woke capital seems to be the root cause of what we're seeing now. I mean, most recently, Gina Carano was fired from Disney. Clearly, they had an axe to grind. They wanted to get rid of her from all the Star Wars projects, but it was one example, a recent example of this expansion of the influence of a woke capital mindset that is almost, if you read our author guest's book, a religious fervor that's driving this. Today, I am so pleased to be joined by the author of a brand new book entitled The Dictatorship of Woke Capital, Stephen R. Soukup, who is the senior commentator, vice president, and publisher of The Political Forum, an independent research provider delivering research and consulting services to the institutional investment community. And he joins me now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Stephen, welcome to the program. It's so good to have you.
Thank you very much for having me, Jimmy. It's my pleasure.
You know, I was fascinated reading your book because you took a direction that I wasn't exactly expecting, and it was a very interesting read. You include a lot of sort of philosophical points talking about political philosophers, not just American philosophers. You go out to Germany and so forth. And of course, you're talking about a cultural moment, and your timing couldn't have been better. It was as though you knew what was going to happen in the corporate world with Disney, which you have a whole chapter on and talk about in the book. Over the course of the last month, we've seen a lot of things go haywire in that regard. Just tell me, what inspired you to write The Dictatorship of Woke Capital?
Well, Jimmy, you're right. The timing of the release of this book is pretty fortuitous. Couldn't have asked for better timing. But that notwithstanding, this is an issue that has been building within capital markets in particular for a long time. I have worked in the financial services industry for 25 years, my entire professional career, at the crossroads between Washington and Wall Street. Um, and about 2 years ago, uh, I became more and more frustrated with the direction that the capital markets were taking, that the direction that some of the large asset management firms were taking, and the direction that a lot of corporate boards and corporate directors were taking. I started my own investigation, and then I spoke with Danhoff, who's since become a good friend, and Justin is the director of the Free Enterprise Project uh, at the National Center for Public Policy Research. And for a long time, Justin has been the only person sort of pushing back against this very aggressive, very politicized campaign to alter the way our capital markets function, and thereby to alter the way our economy and our politics function as well.
It seems so strange to me that corporations would prioritize something different than what corporations have historically been in terms of the overall goal. I don't mean that corporations haven't been more sensitive in terms of their business models to environmental concerns or to making sure that they are treating their customers properly and so forth. But now it seems that for a lot of these companies, they are subordinating the original goals upon which those companies were based in the beginning, their foundational goals and objectives, including making a profit for their shareholders, and subordinating it to this idea of ESG investing. Talk to us about that.
Well, ESG investing, ESG stands for environmental, social, and corporate governance investing. And ESG has been the hottest trend in global investments over the past probably 2 or 3 years. Uh, the amount of money pouring into ESG related funds and ESG related debt instruments over the past couple of years has doubled every year probably for the last 5 years. So it's become an enormous issue. As for how and why and what brought us to this point, where capitalists are pushing hard to the cultural left. The philosophical and historical perspective that you mentioned in your introduction are my way of getting into explaining why that is the case and how that happened. Generally speaking, if you say leftism and capitalism in the same sentence, people think you're nuts. The two don't have anything to do with each other. But what I tried to show were the two historical and philosophical streams that have dominated American culture over the last century and have pushed this cultural leftism to replace the old Marxist economic leftism, and have in turn pushed the nation and its cultural institutions way to the left.
Once again, we're talking with Stephen Soukup, who's author of this book right here, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. And in the book, you talk about two different kinds of ESG investors. And I found this fascinating because it's not necessarily that they're all actually woke and true believers with a religious fervor, nor is it that they are necessarily going at it from the perspective of let's make a buck and this is the way to do it, although it may be one or the other. Talk to us about the mindset behind these ESG investors and the two types of approaches or rationales behind this.
Well, historically, over the last 10 or 15 years, the people who have been most involved in ESG were small activist nonprofits or small activist asset managers who got involved in the ESG movement specifically because they wanted to change the way business functioned, and they wanted to change the way the American system functions more generally. So these are true believers. These are people who are far to the cultural left, who believe that capitalism needs to change in order to survive, and the way it needs to change is to be more democratized and more socially responsible. But over the past 5 years, seeing the success of this movement, we've seen another type of investor get involved, and this isn't a more traditional capitalist investor who said, this is really hot. This is really something that we can get involved in. And if we do, we can do really well by doing good.
So, when we talk about ESG investing and the approach here that is growing in dominance, one of the things that you discuss in the book really struck me as being comparable to the leftist idea of let's use government to achieve social ends. That is, let's change society through government power and do it to the best of our ability, even if it is in opposition to where people are at in a cultural moment. That is to say, you don't have to follow just the will of the voters. You can do things your own way and try to see how far along you can get. It seems that there's a similar sort of philosophy here, which is this notion that those in these woke capitalist corporations, Stephen, have this sort of self-serving idea that they know better than the average consumer, and therefore they ought to be able to help remold society through their different business practices, through maybe silencing certain types of speech or what have you. And I found that to be basically the leftist ideology of what you can do with government in remolding society moved into a corporate context.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I start the historical portion of the book in 1876 in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins University, where Richard Ely, who is one of the godfathers of the progressive movement, is a professor working with a PhD student, Woodrow Wilson, another one of the godfathers of the progressive movement. And Wilson, of course, is also the godfather of American public administration. An idea that comes out of the partnership between Ely and Wilson is this idea that the nation needs a professional bureaucratic class, administrative class, to manage the function of government, separated and insulated from the voters, separated and insulated from the democratic process, because the voters are simply not sophisticated, not smart enough, not well trained enough to understand what needs to be done. And this is a trend that has persisted on the political left ever since. For a long time, this was, when Wilson became president, this was something that he pushed. This became an issue in the education of administrators in this country. When it became clear that the bureaucracy was not the panacea that Wilson at all hoped for, they moved on to other institutions. They spent probably the last, most of the last 50 years trying to use the courts to achieve these post-democratic or anti-democratic ends. And slowly over the past couple of decades, that's become less and less effective for them. And so now they found another avenue to push their beliefs, which they're absolutely positively convinced are the proper beliefs and the only way to save the world, to make this a better place. They absolutely believe that, and now they're using business to achieve that end.
Whether they're using business or going the judicial route that you've observed, and clearly that's been the case for decades now, or going back to the idea of the bureaucracy, which in many respects still is in place. Like that objective has not gone away. It's just that they've moved on, kept moving on, as you're saying, down the progression towards what's the next method that we can be most effective at this point, because those previous methods weren't working as well as we thought they might. But there's such an arrogance to this idea that we, the elite institutions, in this case, the woke capitalists, know better. And that philosophy of we know better, so let us do it, I think leads to social ruin. And clearly it can result in much more discord within our society, Stephen.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. You look, just over the past year, the anti-Trump COVID mantra was listen to the science, follow the science, listen to the experts. It turns out that the experts are telling us that we need to stay home. We can't celebrate our holidays, but are driving up to New Jersey to celebrate Thanksgiving with their family. Or, it's Anthony Fauci telling us we don't need masks. We do need masks. Maybe we'll need 2 masks. This is the failure the collapse of expertise in this country. And this is definitely a big part of being is this insistence on deferring to the experts, and then the experts turning out not to be so expert after all.
Once again, we're talking with Stephen Soukup, author of this book, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. And notice that logo image. If you try to figure out what it is, hopefully you'll succeed. You've got the Mickey Mouse ears, you've got the Apple look, like Apple products, and you've got Amazon. Let's talk about these three companies for a moment, Stephen, because I think you've identified the hot button ones, and clearly Disney's been in the hot seat and getting a lot of attention over the past few weeks, particularly due to the firing of Gina Carano from the Star Wars series. What is it that really gets you to think, these are the three companies we need to identify? Is it their size and their influence? Is there something about their approach to ESG investing that really comes at you as being significant? Talk to us about that.
Well, I started with Apple. Apple is not just the largest corporation in the world. It's the largest corporation the world has ever known. And it also presents the face of the ESG movement. At home, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, is a very aggressive, very unapologetic social justice warrior. He writes about social justice. He uses his own money to support social justice. He uses the company's money to support social justice. He's active and very involved in this. Additionally, Apple is one of the environmentalists' darling companies. It is a company that professes to be net carbon neutral. It is environmentally friendly. It supports environmental causes. And as I said, it's leading the way in environmental practices. So I wanted to start with Apple, in part because I knew that public image is not quite what it seems, that once you make the trip across the Pacific Ocean to the People's Republic of China, that you see that the public image in the United States is not necessarily the image of Apple in China. But when I started digging into Apple, I discovered that you can hardly talk about Apple without talking about Disney. And a big part of the reason for that is that Disney and Apple are very, very connected companies. For the longest time, for most of the last decade, Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, sat on the board of directors of Apple, has said explicitly that if expected that the two would be company, for that same period of time that he sat on Apple's board of directors, the single largest shareholder of Disney stock was a woman named Laurene Powell Jobs, who is, of course, Steve Jobs' widow. And the two companies have, in fact, sort of made parallel bets on their future using the People's Republic of China as the major engine of their economic success forward.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that they have been making these advancements, in some ways making movies, like the way that they approached Mulan in Disney's case is one example.
Right.
Clearly shows that they have China in mind. And increasingly Hollywood in general has gone in that direction of, let's make sure that China likes what we're producing, will share their movies, allow us to showcase the films and sell tickets so people can watch them in their country and so forth. I mean, I'm a big Star Wars fan, and we mentioned Gina Carano before,
right.
And they actually shrunk down the character of Finn on one of the Star Wars promotional posters because he's a black character. And that shows that Disney is, it seems, at times woke when they need to be or feel they should be, and decide to abandon the wokeness when it benefits them more, say in China.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. If you watched the Doctor Strange movie and wondered how the Ancient One, who in the comic book is an ancient Tibetan monk, suddenly turned out to be a middle-aged English woman, that is in part, or I mean, that it's entirely the influence of the People's Republic of China on Disney's decision-making. They said, if you put a Tibetan in this movie as a sympathetic character, it is not going to air in China. And so Disney made what was the wise economic move and said, okay, fine, we won't. But that's clearly capitulation to a very, I mean, unpleasant is an understatement, government in Beijing.
Yeah, understatement for sure. Let's talk about Amazon for a moment. What strikes you most about that company?
Well, obviously, you saw. We mentioned that Disney has had its problems recently, but Amazon as well has had its problems.
Right.
Um, Amazon Web Services decided that Parler no longer deserved to be a company, no longer deserved to have a web presence, and Amazon Web Services controls, somewhere between 80 and 90% of the internet. So, on their decision, Parler disappeared. The interesting thing about Amazon is that it too presents this face of corporate wokeness and corporate social responsibility. But again, it under the surface, it's not quite the company that Jeff Bezos would like you to believe.
Once again, we're talking with Stephen R. Soukup. He is the author of this book, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. I want to ask you about the disservice to investors that I think these companies do when they prioritize this notion of ESG investing or the woke capitalist mindset over providing the quality service that they should for customers, but also in particular, I mean, frankly, the goal of a corporation is to make sure that they are serving the desires, interests, needs, profit of their shareholders. Aren't they doing a disservice to investors as well as to their customers when they focus so much on this kind of woke mindset, Stephen?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. They're doing a disservice to their customers. They're doing a disservice to investors. And frankly, they're doing a disservice to the nation and to the world, more specific or more generally. Um, Recent research has shown that most of the new filed for advances in clean energy, the type of thing that we're going to need in the future if we decide that we do, in fact, need to decarbonize. Those patents are being filed almost entirely by traditional energy companies, by the fossil fuel companies, by the companies that these businesses, these asset managers, and they're trying to decapitalize and trying to put out of business. So, if in fact their goal is to advance decarbonization and to make it more technologically and politically palatable, they're slitting their own throat. This is a mistake. And as you say, this it starts from the top all the way down to the bottom. They're doing a disservice to a great number of constituencies.
One thing you talk about a lot in the book, Stephen, is this idea that the woke capitalists have begun to overstep. What do you mean by that? And in what ways have they gone about overstepping that maybe has caused some problems or challenges for them moving forward with this mindset? And do you think that the fact that they've overstepped can help those of us who want to combat woke capitalism?
Well, the first indication that they had overstepped and they were a little too overconfident probably came 2 years ago when the state of Georgia, the elected representatives of the people in a center-right state, passed, and the elected governor in a center-right state signed a fetal heartbeat bill, and a lot of these woke corporations. And particularly the entertainment industry led by Disney, decided that they couldn't tolerate that. They could not tolerate a enacting the will of its people in contravention to their political beliefs. And so what these companies did was they said, if you do not change, if you go ahead and go forward with this, we don't think we can continue to do business in Georgia. Georgia has spent the last 2 decades cultivating a relationship with entertainment companies. Nearly 100,000 Georgians, average everyday Georgians, not Hollywood stars, not anybody from the West Coast, just average Georgians, earn their living because of jobs in the entertainment industry. So Bob Iger decides that he doesn't like this abortion bill. And he says, I don't think we're going to be able to do business there. And he's threatening, literally threatening the livelihood of 100,000 Georgians because of his political beliefs. And that didn't sit very well with a number of high profile national legislators, particularly Tom Cotton, the Senate, who railed against Disney, who railed against the entertainment industry, and who railed against this dictatorship of woke capital on the Senate floor.
Once again, we're talking with Stephen Soukup, who is the author of The Dictatorship of Woke Capital, new book. Be sure to check it out. It is a fascinating read. He's also the senior commentator, vice president, and publisher of The Political Forum. Stephen, one thing that, of course, you cannot have a conversation about woke capital and what's happening in the corporate world without incorporating the question of how come we've gotten this far where there are corporations who are prioritizing things that you would think are completely antithetical to the very idea of a corporation in terms of this notion of let's make ESG investing the guiding point for how we conduct our activities. You talk about how the market hasn't been able to self-correct this issue due to its size and its scope. Talk to us about that, because we need to dive into what we can do about this in terms of solutions.
Well, when I talk about the size and the scope of the problem, I have in mind three companies in particular, and they are the three largest passive asset management firms in the country. They're Blackrock, which is the largest asset management firm in the world, which controls some $9 trillion in assets. We're talking about Vanguard, which controls some $7 trillion in assets. And we're talking about State Street, which has about $5 trillion. So combined, they have about $20 to $21 trillion in assets under management. And that translates into roughly 25 to 28, 30% of every share, or 25 to 28% of all shares of every single company on the S&P 500, for example, which means that they have an enormous enormous amount of leverage if they decide to act in unison. Now, for years, they've all said, don't worry about it. We have different investment philosophies. We have different investment goals. This is not something that you need to worry about. But over the past couple of years, and starting with Larry Fink's letter to clients and CEOs in 2020, all three of these companies have declared that their primary investment direct is sustainability. So now all three of them are pushing for all companies up and down every index, all publicly traded firms, to focus their energies on decarbonizing and on reporting their efforts on decarbonization to the asset managers, so that they will be able to tell who's doing what and in what context.
And so, given the challenges of market self-correction, you've seen some Republicans, you talk about them in the book, Tom Cotton of Arkansas, Marco Rubio of Florida, Josh Hawley of Missouri, that are looking more at a heavy-handed government approach. At least that's how I would assess where they're going. And that to me is very concerning, because I worry about the government that has the ability to use force in a way corporations cannot, even more than I do about the corporations. But clearly, there is a deeply disturbing trend that we're talking about in regards to the woke capital movement among these massive corporate infrastructure elements. So what do we do about this, Stephen Soukup?
Well, certainly there is going to be a role for government in pushing back against this. I'm not sure what that role is or how significant it will be. I've had several people ask me over the last couple of months whether antitrust is something that we can use to combat the massive power that these three passive asset management firms have accumulated. I don't know specifically how that would be applied. I do know that, like you, I don't trust government to make that decision necessarily. In order for that decision to be made effectively and to be carried out effectively, I'd have to trust our political class more than I do. So I'm uncomfortable with that. So I would prefer to see solutions on the individual level or on the small investor level. First of all, know where your money is going. Know where your 401k is invested. Know where your IRA is invested. Know where your financial advisor is putting your funds. If it's in a Blackrock fund, any fund, not even an ESG fund, you are supporting ESG and you are supporting this movement because Larry Fink has said all of their funds will be directed toward this same sustainability goal by the end of the year. So be aware of what is happening with your money. And that's the other thing to note about these passive asset management firms is they take your money, they invest it in these companies, and what you get in return is you get a diversified portfolio. What you don't get are the voting rights that normally come with holding shares of stock. The asset management firms retain those rights and they leverage those rights. They leverage your money, the rights that they are usurping from you to advance their political agendas. That's one of the most dangerous and least understood aspects of ETF or index fund investing.
Final question for you, Stephen. You talk about how this idea that Wall Street and the Republicans are intertwined like this, that really is a myth. Explain.
Absolutely. It was never true to begin with, and it hasn't been even remotely true for probably the last quarter century. That myth has its history or has its origin in the fact that the Republicans happened to control both houses of Congress and the presidency in 1929 during the Great Crash. But it was never true, and it's even less so today.
Stephen Soukup, the book is The Dictatorship of Woke Capital: How Political Correctness Captured Big Business. Stephen, it is a fascinating and engaging read. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you very much for having me, Jimmy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Once again, Stephen Soukup joining us, author of the book, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. If you're curious about how this woke capitalist mindset developed, how we got to this point with massive corporations like Disney and Amazon and Apple doing things that would seem antithetical to capitalism and to the ideals of freedom and liberty, and totally abandoning the notion of free markets in so many respects, this book is definitely one to check out and learn about those very things, because you really do get a sense for it. But look, the biggest concern for me as I hear about this topic and as I read Dictatorship of Woke Capital, I still get worried about the idea that government might be the entity to take action and address this. Now, I don't see a Biden administration with a Democratic Congress really doing too much, but we'll see where things go with this debate over cancel culture, wokeism in the corporate sector, and what have you. But I do want to urge caution, because once government does something, it is very hard to undo it. And oftentimes, government regulation is used by these big companies as a way to regulate to their advantage. And I would worry about that being a possibility as well. That's why when you talk about antitrust, that seems maybe the more realistic and viable way or appropriate way to go, to the extent that government involvement is appropriate. But as Stephen pointed out, you got to really trust government and government officials to do a good job if you're going to be confident that government is actually the way to go. And I certainly lack that confidence myself. What do you think? Share some thoughts in the comments below. We'll be happy to engage. And again, be sure to check out The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. All right, that is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. My thanks to Stephen Soukup for joining us here on the program, as well as the Washington Examiner, our partners, of course, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and most especially to you for watching, liking, subscribing, and sharing our content. I really do appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with more content very soon. And as always, may God bless America.
Talking politics, great for generations. Oh, what a mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.